FNAF 4 has been referenced many times as the strangest game in the FNAF franchise. Not only was the setting completely different than what we were used to, but Scott hid many important details which he claimed were not just random Easter eggs in this game. And most of these can be found in the in-between night mini-games of the Crying Child. But the community tried hard and we could not solve the story of this game, so Scott had to step in himself and give us clues, one of them pointing directly to the fact that a tiny toy figure of Toy Chica is missing a beak, and he asked why. This led to a bunch of crazy theories and MatPat's famous dream theory. But what if the explanation was way more simpler than you thought? But first we have to understand what was the most popular theory outcome of this specific detail, which is dream theory. And I'm going to be turning it over to 808 Freddy's as he's been recently researching FNAF 4 in depth.
The September 18th GT Live talkback was the first and last time Scott directly hinted to the fanbase what clues he wanted them to use to figure out the story of the game. He wanted MatPat and the entire theorist community to put these clues together and understand what his vision of FNAF 4 was meant to be, how he wanted FNAF 4 to contribute to the larger story of the games. There's a world, an alternate timeline of events where MatPat and company understood exactly what Scott meant by this, and had a brain blast moment where everything came together beautifully. The lore of FNAF was solved, and Scott's soul was finally put to rest and free to move on. His happiest day. But unfortunately, or fortunately depending on how you look at it, we don't live in that world. In his first FNAF theory following this livestream, MatPat revealed his interpretation of Scott's 3 ultimate clues, the infamous dream theory. Basically, dream theory suggests that the night gameplay of all 4 FNAF games takes place in the mind of the bite victim, with the first 3 games taking place pre-bite of 83 and FNAF 4 taking place post-bite. This theory was built on Matt's interpretation of Scott's clues. What is seen in shadows is easily misunderstood in the mind of a child led Matt to conclude that bite victim seeing purple guy help an employee get into a mascot costume is what inspired the story of the MCI, kids' bodies being hidden in suits. He thought 4 games 1 story was Scott's way of indicating that all of the games were connected because they all took place in the bite victim's mind. And most importantly of all, he took the most bizarre and confusing clue in the FNAF 4 minigame, why would the tiny Toy Chica be missing her beak, to mean that this real-life set of toys that included Chica with the missing beak inspired bite victim's dream of FNAF 2, where the shiny new toy animatronics feature a version of Chica whose beak went missing when she moved around the restaurant. This Chica beak clue also led Matt to conclude that everything bite victim saw in the FNAF 4 minigames inspired every aspect of the first 3 games. The 4 plushies in his room inspired the FNAF 1 animatronics, this balloon kid inspired Balloon Boy, this kid's weird finger trap inspired Spring Trap in FNAF 3, and these Fredbear and Spring Bonnie shadows inspired the Shadow animatronics. There are other small correlations too, but those are the main ones from Matt's video. The great big nail in the coffin that Matt had to slam this theory home was the fact that the end of each night in FNAF 1 through 3 is accompanied by a grandfather clock chime, indicating that they end when the bite victim is woken up by the grandfather clock in his hallway. But the nights of FNAF 4 end with a beeping alarm clock, because when bite victim is dreaming those nights, he's not at home anymore. He's in a hospital, which, as we all know very, very well, are all equipped with a digital alarm clock. Since MatPat was kind of the de facto leader of the FNAF theorist community back then, his word on the lore often became the dominant narrative in the fandom, which in my opinion was not really his fault. MatPat gets a lot of flack for making bad theories that dictated fandom discourse like Dream Theory, but you have to remember that he was just doing his best to figure out the series like we all were back then. After Dream Theory dropped, it quickly became the popular solution to FNAF 4 and the entire series at the time. Still, fans and theorists, including Matt himself, pointed out the many, many flaws with it, which would honestly take way too long to list here. Despite these issues, MatPat and many FNAF fans would go on to claim that Dream Theory was retconned by later games, but it was always supposed to be the solution to FNAF 4. In the years since Dream Theory, Scott has made several references to it, both overt and subtle, which indicate that it wasn't just retconned, but it was in fact never canon to the lore. It was never what he meant for people to get from those clues. In the next mainline game, Sister Location, Scott included this breaker room map that explicitly shows that everything we see in FNAF 4, including the night gameplay sections, are real physical locations in the world. This seems like an overcorrection on Scott's part to throw a massive wrench into Dream Theory because he never meant it to be canon. Before Ultimate Custom Night came out, Scott released an April Fool's Day fake teaser that described some of the enemies from the upcoming game, each one clearly a tongue-in-cheek reference to a popular fan theory that had become a meme. The description of Nightmare Freddy was poking fun at Dream Theory, suggesting it was a theory of the same caliber as Foxy is a good guy or Purple Guy is the phone guy. In Ultimate Custom Night itself, Mr. Hippo has several extremely long, rambling voice lines. YouTuber Gibby's Horror Homestead pointed out that one of these lines seems to poke fun at Dream Theory. It was another instance of Scott suggesting that it was never canon and that it completely threw fan discourse off track for years, which it did. There are other silly references to Dream Theory Scott has sprinkled in throughout the years, and he even went as far as to say that MatPat inconvenienced him with his theories, a comment which, while made in good humor, suggests that MatPat would sometimes get the lore so wrong that it made telling the story more difficult for Scott, since he'd have to work even harder to clarify his intentions and course correct. I could ramble about Dream Theory forever since there's just so much to talk about on a meta level, but I'm gonna throw it back to Mactacular to get to the bottom of what these 5 pixels were actually trying to tell us.
Thank you, 808. And now that we have Dream Theory out of the way, it's time to reassess the data, reassess the evidence, and come to new conclusions. And in this case, there are several things that we can cover. The next question we need to put an answer to is the Toy Chica's beak able to be removed as a toy feature, or did the girl herself break it off? I'm going to be using a little bit of Occam's razor to answer this question. If you don't know what this means, it's basically the idea that sometimes the most simplest explanation is the correct one. And I'm going to use the evidence of Mangle in the FNAF 4 minigames to help solve this. We learned from Ralph in the FNAF 2 phone calls that Mangle was not originally a character that was a mangled mess. It became that.
Now he's just a mess of parts. I think the employees refer to him as just the Mangle.
But yet, in the FNAF 4 minigames, we can see in the child's, most likely a girl's, bedroom, the fact that there seems to be a toy that is a mangled mess. It makes way more logical sense to me that whoever was playing with this toy was simply copying what they were seeing in real life. And I think it's possible that that's exactly how we need to interpret Toy Chica's missing beak. And that this girl who's playing with these toys has seen Chica in her attack mode, as Scott Cawthon calls it. Plus, in my opinion, it really wouldn't make much sense for Fazbear Entertainment to make a product that has something dark behind it. You see, I like to believe the theory that William Afton was involved in the creation of the toy animatronics as possibly killing machines. Kind of like how we see in the FNAF 2 movie, and I think it's a very obvious parallel to the Funtime animatronics. And so if William Afton had given Toy Chica this attack mode capability, which almost seems to allow her to bite better, why would he be promoting this through a toy? Now that we've answered that, let's answer this question. How do we know 100% that this is a toy figure of Toy Chica, not Classic Chica? Because after all, in Scott's clue, he simply says, why would the tiny Toy Chica be missing her beak? And this is a tiny toy, so how do we know it's exactly Toy Chica? Well, I think the answer lies within this TV, because through some of the snapshots, we get to see different characters that are being shown in the cartoon. And the Bonnie character honestly looks very similar to the toy that the girl is playing with, so theoretically, this could be either Toy Bonnie or Classic Bonnie. But when we come to the image of Classic Chica, we can clearly see the difference in body shape between the two characters. Also, I don't really think I need to mention the fact that Toy Chica is the only FNAF character whose mouth is removable. And also paired with the fact that there is Mangle, which is a toy variant of an animatronic, in the girl's bedroom in the FNAF 4 house, I believe it's safe to say that this is in fact Toy Chica, not Classic Chica. Now for the past few minutes now, we've only been focusing on the Toy Chica figure, but how about we take a closer look at its owner, this mysterious girl? Because what if Scott Cawthon wasn't trying to ask specifically something about this toy? What if it was a red herring? He wanted us to look more specifically at the girl. Now, according to my findings, there are 2 characters that show up in FNAF that could possibly be the identity of this mysterious girl. Those 2 characters being the MCI victim named Susie, or possibly Elizabeth Afton. Now, if we're going to say that this character is possibly actually Susie, Let's take a look at the characteristics of this sprite compared to what we see of Susie in FNAF 6. Both of them have the same shirt color, the hair color. This would be depicting an 8-bit style of curly hair. They each have a red bow tie and blue eyes. To be honest, if someone had shown me this before with no context and said this was the 8-bit sprite for Susie, I would have totally believed them. But if this truly is Susie, what are the implications of saying this? Well, just look how close she is to the pizzeria and William Afton's home. That could possibly mean that William Afton has been watching her for a while because she eventually ends up being an MCI victim. And also in FNAF 1, we learned from the newspapers that it was 5 local children who went missing. And so it would honestly make sense for Scott Cawthon to include some of the MCI victims in the immediate area of Freddy's to kind of go along with those newspapers. However, there are some issues with this theory for me to 100% believe it. I am personally a strong contender for MCI 83. I think it makes a lot of sense. And I also believe that why the crying child is so scared in the FNAF 4 minigames is because he's been seeing Spring Bonnie murder each one of his friends, starting with Susie being the first. Do you see the problem here? If this is Susie, Susie should be dead at the moment, but she's not. And so even though, while I think this is a great theory and I could be wrong about MCI 83, I don't personally believe this. Now let's talk about Elizabeth Afton. Is it possible that this is the identity of this girl? Now, using the idea of Occam's razor, I think that once you start to hear more about this theory, you will say, yeah, there's way too much we have to complicate in order to make this the identity of Elizabeth. For a while, a lot of people thought that this was actually Elizabeth, but then more recently, there's been a theory that this is who this was. Simply because, one, they wore the same colored shirt, their hair is somewhat similar, they both wear a red bow, and the fact that the Toy Chica is broken connects her with the girl's bedroom in the FNAF 4 house. However, one of the biggest issues for me is the hair and the eye color. The hair, even though it's a little bit similar, is definitely not an orange color. And as for the eyes, those are definitely not green eyes, they are blue. Now, I've heard some people try to explain the fact that it's actually common sometimes for young children's eye color to change from blue to green. And to be honest, that could have some sort of connection with Circus Baby and her eyes at once being blue and then being green. However, I feel like it takes more faith to believe the fact that it is Elizabeth Afton than to not believe it. It was then at this point in the theory where I felt like I was kind of stuck. I didn't know exactly where to go. But that's when I looked at it from a little bit of a different angle. And one thing that I asked myself was, what was the context of when FNAF 4 was released? And the reason why this is important is because FNAF 4 was supposed to be the final chapter of the FNAF series, which of course by this point we know is not the case. But the reason I bring this up is because in the first 4 FNAF games, we should have had enough information to solve the original story. And so that's when I started looking at this tiny Toy Chica and try to connect it to something else from the past games. And the only thing that connected with me was the Happiest Day minigames from FNAF 3. And there are multiple different elements that parallel with these FNAF 4 minigames and the Happiest Day minigames. Toy Chica, Mangle, Balloon Boy, and just the overall idea of something being broken and needing to be put back together. Because that's literally what we're doing in the FNAF 3 minigames. We are rebuilding the crying child's memory and giving him his happiest day. And I think that's one thing that Scott wanted us to take away from asking this question. The second thing that I think is important to take into consideration is timeline. I sincerely believe that the FNAF 4 minigames do take place in the year of 1983. And there are references here of not only the classic animatronics, but the toy animatronics. And so what exactly does this mean? I believe Scott did this to help us give us a more narrowed down timeline of events of the MCI and when the first Freddy's location opened up. I believe that there is a lot of evidence to point to the fact that this pizzeria is in fact not Fredbear's, but Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, the original location, not the franchise location. The location where William Afton committed his first 5 murders in the year of 1983. And if you want to see even more evidence on why I believe this is the first Freddy's location, go check out this video right here. And I hope you have all enjoyed today's video, and I just wanted to give a special thank you to 808 Freddy's for collabing with me on today's video. And with that, I hope you all have a fantastic day.